We are about to find out about Debut, a fusion of storytelling and play. Stay tuned. We will now begin. Welcome to the Debut interview series. Hopefully everybody's talking about it. I'm Kevin Cordy, and every month we feature three amazing accomplished storytellers who will tell a story for the very first time right here on Debut. And as you listen, you may give feedback that, hey, we may hear the story 3 years from now or 6 months from now, and you'll say, I first heard this on Debut. I'd like to bring on one of those accomplished storytellers. I'd like to tell you a little bit about her. She's an award-winning storyteller. She goes on storytelling expeditions from the North Pole to Antarctica, and she literally travels, talks about places. I understand that she's also a tall teller, or stretches the truth, or some would say a good liar. But either way, she's enchanting. She's inviting. She's told from at the National Storytelling Festival, and now is also telling on your neighborhood Zoom. It is a rich, rich pleasure to have someone that has traveled all over the world, but right now we have her here. We have her here in Debut Land. Let us welcome Ingrid Nixon. Welcome, Ingrid.
Hey, Kevin.
Yay! And honestly, the applause is real because we are so glad that you're here. And you just came back from telling stories. Is that correct?
Yes, that is true.
All
I
right.
was telling a good lie with those people on the East Coast nest.
And there's definitely an audience for good liars outside of used car salesmen or salespeople, excuse me. But you know, a story takes us to all kinds of places, doesn't it?
It is a great way to stretch the imagination.
And we need to do that. You know, a story isn't just for entertainment. Sometimes it's to help us. I read recently, Joan Didion said that story is a way that we stay alive. How would you respond to that?
Yeah. It's the way, I mean, it's the way we make sense of the world. You know, we don't sit down at the table and just go, me, hungry, day. You know, I mean, it's like you put it all together.
Yeah, I sit and watch the groundhog right in front of my window, and you know, they're not sitting around telling tales, but maybe they are. I don't know. But you're right. It's the way we make meaning, and it would be boring if we just sat around going, "Me hungry."
Thank goodness we've evolved.
Exactly. So let's talk about your route or your journey as a storyteller. What brought you? I mean, I know you've probably heard this question, but what brought you into story?
Well, I think, you know, like most storytellers, like most people, I mean, we do tell stories. And I do remember in my early years as a ranger in Denali National Park in Alaska, I was an interpretive ranger. So the rangers do the walks and talks. And I had one particular program I did. When I was done, a woman came up to me and she's like, "Are you a storyteller?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm a ranger." And so it would be a number of years before I actually was sort of driven by my work with the Park Service to go to a storytelling festival to learn a little bit more about telling stories. And that weekend changed my life. It was when I discovered platform telling, when I discovered that whole style and nature of telling stories and really crafting stories. And so when I was a ranger, there was a time where for our program, we wanted to learn a little bit more about storytelling. And so my mother was a member of a storytelling group in the Pacific Northwest. And they put on this great festival every year, the Forest Festival. And so I said, well, why don't I go down there? They've got workshops, they've got performance, and I'll see what I can learn. And what I learned that festival, and I brought back to the park, it actually changed the program entirely. And it also was something, I mean, it changed my life. And when I walked away from that, I'm like, I have to have storytelling in my life. And so
And
it's been, that was back in 2002.
I love it. So it's in your blood, it's in your bones now, and it's how you respond. I know that I went to a museum and they were like saying, "This is what this place is. This is what this place is," and they hired me to go in and say, "Well, they didn't know." They said, "Well, what can you do? Can you jazz up our docents? You know, the people coming in?" And they were kids, they were teens, and so I said, "Let's start. Let's look at this place. And what are you most curious about?" And I said, let's tell the story of this place. Nobody wants to hear that this is, you know, this is the artifact from this. So as a ranger, I'm sure that affected your work, where you were just saying, let me tell you the story of where we are or what happened 5 years ago. So it's not just platform telling, as you say, or Case Stone calls it organized storytelling. You're finding it just in the work of what you're doing within the wilds as well.
Right. Well, what you described, we describe as a furniture tour, you know. But what you do, you know, if you're leading a walk or if you're putting together a longer presentation, you think of the topic and you think of it as the story, you know. Programs are always thematic, so they all hold together, but you're really kind of putting it in the nuggets so that people's brains can hold onto it more effectively.
And that's how we
Yeah.
learn. I mean, you know, that's actually what I've studied is that story is our impulse. It's how we make meaning. And we were talking about that right before. One of my favorite places, Yosemite. And I know Lee Stetson, a colleague and a friend, and he would tell the story of Yosemite as John Muir. And then when you went out to look, you're like, oh, I know what happened here. I know that Teddy Roosevelt was on the rocks with Lee Stetson, and that's why we have the national parks. I mean, you remember the story, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had the great pleasure of seeing him do his John Muir story. And actually, John Muir came up here to Glacier Bay, Southeast Alaska, where I am. And there's a wonderful story of an experience he had with a little dog on a glacier that's, you know, probably about 20 miles, air miles from where I am. The story is Stickeen, but it just brings in the emotions and the excitement of exploration at that time, and also the profound experiences that you can have with others, humans and otherwise. Yeah,
Definitely. And
very powerful.
I knew someone that did Stickeen and Muir very young, and then Lee as the older. So I got the best of both worlds. It was a lot of fun. And he did a whole show as Stickeen. So, a ranger, adventurer, story. Once you had the bug, a story, or once story hit you, where'd you take it from there?
Well, what I quickly realized is that I was living in Interior Alaska at the time. And, you know, the storytelling festival that my mother was part of, that was, you know, once a year. And so I decided I wanted to do the ETSU master's program, East Tennessee State University. And so I enrolled in the program. And with that, I had the freedom to leave Alaska for a few weeks every summer to go to the ETSU campus, do classes in person. And there were a couple of classes that were offered distance, but I loved being there in person. And then, of course, Jonesboro's right there. And so many of the tellers that I encountered at ETSU were also coming to the festival in Washington State that I was involved in. And so it was just this wonderful community, and things just grew from there.
Well, and ETSU is an amazing program. And my little ETSU story is that I was studying my master's at the University of Akron, and my advisor said, Kevin, you really have to declare something. It's like required. I said, you don't have what I want. He said, what do you want, Kevin? I said, storytelling. He said, you're right. We don't have that. And I said, but East Tennessee does. So I called Flora Joy, and I think you studied under Dr. Sobel or Joseph. And you know, and I had the good nature of sort of learning from both. But Flora was there, and I called her up, and you might be surprised at this. I said, look, I want a master's in storytelling, but I'm at the University of Akron. I'd like to take beginning, advanced, and all your institutes at the same time. And
Wow.
she said, who are you? I said, this is who I am. And not only that, I stayed a couple of weeks afterwards to work on a book on story that became Raising Voices with Judy Sema. But it was a book before that. It was Storytelling Across the Disciplines, which, and Flora like left to go somewhere and just left her my office. It left me her office. And so I took beginning, advanced, all the institutes, all at the same time, because that's all I could do to get to the master's, and then worked with Flora for the book, and then later got my PhD in storytelling.
Oh, my
But
word.
from TSU Ken, right here. Here we go, Ingrid.
Awesome. Buccaneer.
And there is nothing like that experience. It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd sit in the beginning class and the advanced class, and like you get inundated story.
Mhm. No, it was great, and I did have the good fortune with Dr. Sobel and Dr. Reed, and then I was also on the very slow boat, so it took me 7 years to get my finally get my thesis done. So I got to meet such a great number of people over the course of those years. I mean, it was absolutely brilliant.
And I almost
So,
envy that. I mean, I know you wanted to rush, but you had all those
mhm,
beautiful story institutes. And for those people who don't know, they do a
mhm,
week-long institute with some amazing storytellers, whether it's Heather Forrest or Elizabeth Ellis or and at one point it was the only graduate storytelling program in the United States. It was the
mhm,
first, but it's now not the only. And with Flora Joy, I mean, she ran Storytelling World Awards, and Joseph's done amazing things. Dr. Sobel's done amazing things. It's just great to see it, and it's so close to Jonesboro as well. And we could
mhm.
talk forever about ETSU.
Well, it is awesome. So if people want to talk to me about it, feel free to contact me.
Yes, yes, and they'll work with you. They'll definitely work with you
Mhm.
within the cost of tuition and with agreements, kind of thing, in some states. So Ingrid, as a teller, I often say that telling and teaching kind of go together sometimes. What about for you?
Mhm.
Because I do know that you offer classes on whether tall tale workshops or just the art of telling, or I imagine even the expedition insights that you work on.
Well, the types of stories that I tell usually are there's some aspect of teaching in them. Certainly on an expedition, if you're sharing folklore, it's people are learning about the culture. If it's about Antarctic history, people are learning about early explorers. Certainly in national parks, it's the same thing. But I will also say that, telling stories at festival settings kind of opens it up and gives you that chance to learn about, the human heart. And it also just allows you those creative flights of fancy, and those just really feed the heart and the mind too, which I really, really enjoy.
And at the same time, I've heard you tell, and I've watched you on some of these Zoom worlds, and you do your homework. In the sense of if it's a historical tale, but you're also taking risks. I see you playing with risks as you're telling. Am I wrong, or am I observer, or are you tricking me?
Well, what do you mean by risks?
Well, not all the tales are of the same genre.
Mm.
You have a nice sense of timing. You're attuned to the audience. But and I even see some breathing going on. I mean, I know breathing is regular, but like some sense of valuing silence and pausing. Am I wrong there?
Mm. Well, I like what you said, so I hope you're right. But I guess what I would say is that, being a ranger, like coming into it from that National Park Service bent, every bit of interpretation that takes place in a national park is sort of focused on sharing that story,
Right.
that why that park exists. And you want people to connect with that. But what I enjoy about sort of the broader world of storytelling is that it allows me to just explore other creativities. And so I enjoy that a lot. I know I do resist kind of getting channeled down one specific way. It's like, what does my audience need? It's an expedition. Got that. What I really enjoy with when I get a chance to share folklore on an expedition is that that doesn't happen a whole lot. So people are learning a lot of natural history, they're learning a lot of facts. And so to then take them into stories that they suddenly are like, oh, I didn't realize, that King Arthur was in this part of the landscape. And they just connect with it in a different way.
And
So, yeah.
one of my students said to me, Mr. Cordy, you got to realize this is the first time that we know this information you're sharing with us. So we have to remember that at all times. Ingrid, one of the things that the reasons for a debut is that storytellers don't often talk about their craft, except sometimes they have one or two people that they talk about. But for me, story making is just as important as storytelling. And play for me is very, very important to that. So when you're exploring, how important is story making to you?
Explain what you mean by
Sure.
story making.
It's the process in creating the story. It's the risk that you take in creating the story. It's the choices that you make. But then I'd also argue that stories are being made every time that you tell it as well. Just from an example, when I was 18, I learned stories on an old cassette tape. I mean, I saw a festival and then it went away, and I'm like, "There's where do I go?" And I started mimicking Elizabeth Ellis. All I had was a title, Elizabeth Ellis. I've never seen anyone. I just listened to it, and I just started mimicking what I was hearing and modeling that. But now, when I work on a story, I take risks. I make choices that I normally don't do. I take stories in different directions. I imaginatively make the story and play with it. I say we handcuff ourselves when we go straight to paper because we haven't played in the world. I call it word dancing. If we haven't word danced in the world that we're trying to create, we're stuck to that paper, and that's our limited frame. And I'm a writing director. I believe in writing, but I believe in the experience of finding stories in different ways than just writing it down. And there's a thing in the storytelling tradition that everybody writes it down, then they tell it, and then they lift away from it, and then they go. And every process can be honored, but I just like you said, I don't want to be stuck in one genre. I don't think we need to make the story from one way.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, for me, when I first started telling stories, I would do an outline because that just kind of helped me figure out the skeleton of the story. But I have one story that it was Why Mosquitoes Buzz in People's Ears. It's a great African story. And I remember it was like I had it down, but it was just like lying there. And so I started playing with voices and I started playing with characters, and all of a sudden it just popped. And that was a really great lesson for me. And that is something, it's interesting. Over time, I don't write stories down. I do a lot of story thinking as I walk. So I do a lot of story work as I walk. I'll sometimes just set out with the idea like, I need to come up with a tall tale, or there's something about this traditional story that I like. And it just starts to unreel as I walk. And somehow things naturally find a balance. And when I'm done with that walk or several walks, I'll be like, how is this looking right now? And it's often it'll be like it's in pretty good shape. And these days I'm even not writing stuff down really at all. And it's nice to get it out that first time, or to then work with some friends. I'm part of the TBD storytelling cohort,
I've heard great
and we
things.
get
Feel free to
together and
plug
we're
them.
like, yeah, well, we get together and we're like, I got something I'm working on, and they give me what I ask for. Sometimes it's just like, I want to say it out loud. And sometimes it's like, well, what do you think about this? Where's the balance? And they kind of work through that. So I agree with you that a story's never done.
I once heard Jane Yolen and Patricia McLaughlin. She said, I meet with the same four people every week whenever all four are in town, and I wouldn't have been able to write anything without those four people. And
Wow.
I think I took a story walk today too, but I actually talk out
Oh,
loud, and it's tall tales. So I'm like, and all of a sudden it's about my book report in the circus, and I'm like, the people that see me, they either know me or run real fast, But I do think that we need to talk out loud because we need to hear what we're playing with at some time. We need to think it, we need to talk it, we need to dance it, we need to do whatever. From working with teenagers for many years in story, I'm like, they don't know the rules, so they try everything, and so I learn from them. Um,
oh,
and so having partners and talking about the process and TBD tellers where people really go beyond, I think that was good. I like it. It sounded nice, but to really, and the best advice that I ever give that I think that people just don't say is give advice inside the story. Say something inside the story. Not, it sounded great, but say what happened inside the story. You can talk about what it was like and where it felt. And I'm sure TBD does that for you often, or you do as well. How about play? How important is play in your work?
play, I need to do more of.
I'm happy to help.
Yes, yes, because it just stretches you, and you find all sorts of exciting avenues and things to explore. I do have a tool that is a source of just all sorts of different techniques that you can use when you're doing interpretive programs. And sometimes I just kind of flip through that and just sort of like, rhyme. How can I throw in rhyme? But that whole back and forth that you do with play is really extraordinary.
And we have to thank you for that. And we have to give ourselves
Mm-hmm.
permission to play.
Mm-hmm.
We have to, and you will at debut. In a
I'm
fun
looking
way.
forward to.
Excellent. And I'm honestly, I'm exploring new ways to play all the time. Some people have heard me say this before. Play is not a rehearsal for life. Play is life. It's where we get to rewind, re-see, rethink, re-energize, and we really put ourselves out. And it's less risky when you're working with people you care about and with. So we create this fear. We create all this fear of, oh my gosh, because when we're young, we're like, oh, but play is something we naturally do. So then that comes to the question of why debut?
Well, I saw your first debut, and what I loved was that whole play, stretching the story. You could just see the tellers finding new avenues and sort of different ways of thinking about things. Different images came up. What I love about debut is that in the times that I've watched it, it's like you see the storyteller playing with the material and discovering new avenues, discovering new images, discovering new approaches. And that's really powerful because the story is so new for them. And also the fact that the audience can weigh in and you're learning something as you're watching this is going on. So it's a really great synergy.
Well, we're calling it a public storytelling playground.
Mm-hmm.
And we really work hard to build the community. And as far as I know, this is the only place that they're doing this kind of frame or format. Not that it can't be some other place, but it's fun. It's a debut of debut and a debut of this method.
I think you're right. I mean, I haven't seen something like this going on elsewhere. But
But I
it's
would love
also,
to see
it's
more
this,
play.
yeah, but it's a safe place. It's a safe place to play that way with stories. And so, you know, as a storyteller, it's like you need to embrace imperfection as you step in front of the group to do this. And it's all good.
One teller said to me, you know, I'm preparing for a concert. I'm preparing for the audience. He said, for debut, I'm preparing for the audience, but I'm also preparing in a different space to be in a play world. He said, it's been years since I've felt that way, and the story has moved different directions. And I go, whoa. And it's everybody working together. And honestly, you know, if you, you know, I see myself as a mediator. Instead of a coach, I say I'm a story mediator, because we work together to create it together. And when is debut? I'll help you if you don't know.
It is May 30th, right?
It is.
Yeah.
At 2
Okay,
o'clock
and it's
Eastern
at 2
Daylight
o'clock your
Time.
time,
And what time? Alaska time.
10 o'clock my time.
There we go.
So,
So, and I'll put up the flyer and everything else. Ingrid,
awesome.
we could talk forever, and I'm looking forward to not only debut, but talking more with you, and eventually sharing a stage with you. And it would be a rich compliment. And I thank you for all the work that you're doing. Wonderful, wonderful work. And Ingrid, I'm going to give you the last word.
I say come to debut. Let's play with stories together and see what wonderful things we can create.
We hope to see you at our debut soon. Look for us. If you want to be a debut teller, let us know. We're waiting for you.